The morning sun barely touched the cold white walls of St. Mary's Children's Hospital as Sarah Mitchell sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair for what felt like forever. Her fingers kept twisting the tissue in her hands until it became nothing but tiny pieces scattered on her lap. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, showing 8:30 in the morning, but Sarah had been there since 5. She could not sleep at home, knowing her daughter was fighting for her life just down this long, empty hallway. Emma was only 8 years old, but she had been battling a rare blood disease for 6 months now. The doctors used big words that Sarah barely understood, but the meaning was clear enough. Her little girl was very sick, and getting sicker every day. The treatments were not working the way they hoped, and time was running out faster than sand in an hourglass. Sarah looked around the waiting area and saw other parents just like her. Mrs. Johnson sat 3 chairs away, staring at nothing while her hands shook slightly. Her son Tommy had been in the hospital for 2 weeks with a brain tumor. Across from her sat a young father named David, whose baby daughter needed heart surgery. Everyone here carried the same heavy weight of worry and fear that pressed down on their shoulders like invisible rocks. The hospital smelled like cleaning supplies, mixed with that strange medicine smell that made Sarah feel sick to her stomach. Nurses walked by in their colorful scrubs trying to smile, but Sarah could see the tiredness in their eyes. They worked so hard to help all these children, but there were never enough miracles to go around. Sarah remembered when Emma first got sick. It started with Emma feeling tired all the time. Then she stopped wanting to play with her toys or watch her favorite cartoons. The bruises appeared on her little arms and legs like purple flowers blooming in all the wrong places. When Emma stopped eating her favorite cookies, Sarah knew something was seriously wrong. The first doctor visit led to blood tests. The blood tests led to more doctors and bigger hospitals. Each step took them further away from their normal life and deeper into this scary world of medical terms and worried faces. Sarah had to quit her job at the grocery store to stay with Emma. Her husband Mark worked double shifts at the factory, but the medical bills kept growing like weeds in their garden. Their savings account that they had built up over 10 years disappeared in just 3 months. The house they had worked so hard to buy now had a second mortgage. Sarah sold her grandmother's jewelry, and Mark sold his fishing boat. They would sell everything they owned if it meant saving Emma, but even that might not be enough. Emma used to laugh all the time. Her giggle was like music that filled their small house with joy. She loved to draw pictures of flowers and butterflies. Her room was full of colorful artwork taped to every wall. But now Emma barely spoke. She lay in her hospital bed looking so small and fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. The other children in the ward broke Sarah's heart too. Little Maria, who was only 5, had lost all her hair from treatments, but still smiled when the nurses came to check on her. Ben, who was 12, tried to be brave for his younger sister, but Sarah saw him crying when he thought nobody was looking. These children were supposed to be playing and learning and growing up to chase their dreams. Instead, they were fighting battles that even grown-ups would find too hard to handle. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember what life was like before all this started. Sunday mornings when Emma would climb into bed with her and Mark. Family trips to the beach where Emma collected seashells. Birthday parties with chocolate cake and too much ice cream. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. The waiting room stayed quiet except for the sound of people breathing and the soft beeping of machines somewhere down the hall. Hope felt as far away as the moon. Sarah did not know that in just a few hours everything would change in ways she never could have imagined. The morning sun barely touched the cold white walls of St. Mary's Children's Hospital as Sarah Mitchell sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair for what felt like forever. Her fingers kept twisting the tissue in her hands until it became nothing but tiny pieces scattered on her lap. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, showing 8:30 in the morning, but Sarah had been there since 5. She could not sleep at home, knowing her daughter was fighting for her life just down this long, empty hallway. Emma was only 8 years old, but she had been battling a rare blood disease for 6 months now. The doctors used big words that Sarah barely understood, but the meaning was clear enough. Her little girl was very sick, and getting sicker every day. The treatments were not working the way they hoped, and time was running out faster than sand in an hourglass. Sarah looked around the waiting area and saw other parents just like her. Mrs. Johnson sat 3 chairs away, staring at nothing while her hands shook slightly. Her son Tommy had been in the hospital for 2 weeks with a brain tumor. Across from her sat a young father named David, whose baby daughter needed heart surgery. Everyone here carried the same heavy weight of worry and fear that pressed down on their shoulders like invisible rocks. The hospital smelled like cleaning supplies, mixed with that strange medicine smell that made Sarah feel sick to her stomach. Nurses walked by in their colorful scrubs trying to smile, but Sarah could see the tiredness in their eyes. They worked so hard to help all these children, but there were never enough miracles to go around. Sarah remembered when Emma first got sick. It started with Emma feeling tired all the time. Then she stopped wanting to play with her toys or watch her favorite cartoons. The bruises appeared on her little arms and legs like purple flowers blooming in all the wrong places. When Emma stopped eating her favorite cookies, Sarah knew something was seriously wrong. The first doctor visit led to blood tests. The blood tests led to more doctors and bigger hospitals. Each step took them further away from their normal life and deeper into this scary world of medical terms and worried faces. Sarah had to quit her job at the grocery store to stay with Emma. Her husband Mark worked double shifts at the factory, but the medical bills kept growing like weeds in their garden. Their savings account that they had built up over 10 years disappeared in just 3 months. The house they had worked so hard to buy now had a second mortgage. Sarah sold her grandmother's jewelry, and Mark sold his fishing boat. They would sell everything they owned if it meant saving Emma, but even that might not be enough. Emma used to laugh all the time. Her giggle was like music that filled their small house with joy. She loved to draw pictures of flowers and butterflies. Her room was full of colorful artwork taped to every wall. But now Emma barely spoke. She lay in her hospital bed looking so small and fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. The other children in the ward broke Sarah's heart too. Little Maria, who was only 5, had lost all her hair from treatments, but still smiled when the nurses came to check on her. Ben, who was 12, tried to be brave for his younger sister, but Sarah saw him crying when he thought nobody was looking. These children were supposed to be playing and learning and growing up to chase their dreams. Instead, they were fighting battles that even grown-ups would find too hard to handle. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember what life was like before all this started. Sunday mornings when Emma would climb into bed with her and Mark. Family trips to the beach where Emma collected seashells. Birthday parties with chocolate cake and too much ice cream. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. The waiting room stayed quiet except for the sound of people breathing and the soft beeping of machines somewhere down the hall. Hope felt as far away as the moon. Sarah did not know that in just a few hours everything would change in ways she never could have imagined. Around 10:30 in the morning, something different started happening in the hospital. Sarah noticed it first when she saw 3 security guards walking down the hallway talking quietly into their little radios. Their voices were too low to hear, but their faces looked serious and alert, like they were preparing for something important. Nurse Patricia, who usually moved slowly because of her bad knees, was suddenly walking faster than Sarah had ever seen. She kept looking at her watch and smoothing down her uniform like she was getting ready for a special inspection. The other nurses were doing the same thing, whispering to each other and checking their appearance in any reflective surface they could find. Dr. Williams, the head of the children's ward, appeared wearing his best white coat instead of the wrinkled one he usually wore. His hair was combed neatly, and he had even put on a tie which Sarah had never seen him wear before. He walked up and down the corridor, checking that everything looked perfect. He moved chairs so they were in straight lines, and made sure there were no papers scattered on the nurse's station desk. Sarah watched all this activity with tired eyes, but did not really care what was happening. She had seen important people visit the hospital before. Politicians came during election time to shake hands and take pictures. Rich business people came to donate money and get their names on plaques. Movie stars sometimes visited to make themselves look good in the newspapers. These visits always followed the same pattern. Important people would arrive with cameras and reporters. They would spend 20 minutes walking around smiling and talking to a few selected families. Then they would leave and everything would go back to normal. The hospital director, Mrs. Campbell, arrived wearing her fanciest suit and highest heels. She never came to the children's ward unless something very special was happening. She started giving instructions to everyone, telling them where to stand and how to act. Sarah could see her lips moving but could not hear the words from where she sat. More security guards appeared at both ends of the hallway. These were not the regular hospital security guards that Sarah recognized. These men looked different, more professional and alert. They wore dark suits and had little earpieces like the security people she had seen on television, protecting important government officials. The janitor, Carlos, who usually took his time cleaning the floors, was suddenly mopping everything twice and making sure every surface sparkled. The volunteer ladies who usually sat at the information desk were fixing their hair and putting on fresh lipstick. Everyone seemed to know something big was about to happen, but nobody was telling the families what it was. Mrs. Johnson leaned over and whispered to Sarah, asking if she knew what all the fuss was about. Sarah just shook her head. She was too tired and worried to care about whatever show was about to begin. Her mind was focused on Emma, who had barely eaten anything for breakfast and seemed to be getting weaker every day. The young father, David, looked up from his phone and asked one of the nurses what was happening. The nurse just smiled and said they would find out soon enough. Her voice had an excited quality that made it clear this was not just another ordinary visit from another ordinary important person. Even the children, who were well enough to be in the playroom, seemed to sense something different was happening. Their voices became quieter, and they kept looking toward the main entrance like they were waiting for someone special to arrive. Sarah closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. She did not want to deal with crowds and cameras and fake smiles today. All she wanted was for Emma to get better and for their family to go home and be normal again. She had no idea that the people walking toward them would change everything in ways she never could have dreamed possible. At exactly 11:15, the elevator doors opened with a soft ding sound that somehow seemed louder than usual in the quiet hallway. Sarah looked up from her tissue and felt her heart stop beating for a moment. Walking out of that elevator were two people she had only ever seen on television and in newspapers. Prince William and Princess Catherine stepped into the children's ward like they belonged there, like this was the most natural thing in the world. Sarah blinked hard, thinking maybe she was dreaming or hallucinating from too much stress and too little sleep. But they were really there. The future King of England was wearing a simple navy blue sweater and dark jeans. He looked like any regular father you might see at a school playground or grocery store. Princess Catherine wore a soft blue dress that was pretty but not fancy. Her hair was styled simply, and she carried a small purse instead of having servants follow her around. The hallway became so quiet you could hear people breathing. Mrs. Johnson grabbed Sarah's arm and whispered, "Oh my goodness, is that really them?" David, the young father, put down his phone and stared with his mouth open. Even the babies in the ward seemed to sense something magical was happening, because their crying stopped almost completely. What surprised Sarah most was how normal they looked. She had expected them to be surrounded by dozens of bodyguards and photographers. She thought they would be wearing expensive clothes and jewelry that cost more than most people make in a year. Instead, they looked like any young couple who might be visiting their own child in the hospital. Dr. Williams walked up to greet them, but before he could start his prepared speech, Prince William held up his hand gently and said they did not want any formal presentations or ceremonies. They were here to meet the families and children, not to pose for pictures or make speeches. Catherine nodded and added that they wanted this to be a real visit, not a publicity event. The hospital director, Mrs. Campbell, looked confused because she had prepared a whole program with photo opportunities and prepared statements. But the royal couple made it clear they were not interested in any of that. They wanted to walk around and talk to people and learn about what life was really like for families dealing with serious childhood illnesses. Sarah watched as they began moving slowly through the waiting area. They stopped at each family and sat down in the uncomfortable plastic chairs just like everyone else. Prince William talked to Mr. Garcia, whose son had been in a car accident. He did not just shake hands and move on. He sat there for 10 whole minutes asking real questions about how the family was coping and what the doctors had said about recovery. Catherine sat on the floor next to a little girl named Sophie who was playing with blocks. She did not worry about getting her dress dirty or messing up her hair. She just got right down on Sophie's level and started building towers with the colorful blocks. Sophie giggled and clapped her hands like she was playing with her favorite aunt instead of a future queen. The nurses and doctors stood back and watched in amazement. They had seen many important visitors over the years, but never anyone who acted like this. Most famous people came and made their appearances and left as quickly as possible. These two seemed like they had all the time in the world for every single person they met. As they got closer to where Sarah was sitting, her hands started shaking even more than before. She did not know what to say to royalty. She had never even met a mayor or city council member, let alone people who lived in palaces and met with world leaders every day. Princess Catherine approached Sarah first with a gentle smile that reached her eyes and made them sparkle with warmth. She did not walk like someone who expected people to bow or curtsy. Instead, she moved like a mother who understood exactly what Sarah was going through. Without asking permission, she sat down in the hard plastic chair right next to Sarah and turned her whole body to face her like she had all the time in the world. "Hello, I am Catherine," she said in a voice that was soft and kind. Sarah almost laughed because, of course, she knew who this was, but the princess introduced herself like they were meeting at a coffee shop or playground. "What is your name, and tell me about your little one?" Catherine asked, while reaching over to gently touch Sarah's trembling hand. Sarah tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and managed to say, "I am Sarah, and my daughter Emma is 8 years old. She has been sick for 6 months now with a blood disease that the doctors say is very rare." As soon as she started talking about Emma, the tears came rushing back like a dam had broken inside her chest. Instead of looking uncomfortable or trying to change the subject, Catherine leaned in closer and listened to every word. She did not interrupt or try to rush Sarah along. She just listened with the kind of attention that Sarah had not received from anyone in months. Even the nurses and doctors who were trying to help always seemed to be in a hurry to get to the next patient or fill out the next form. Prince William pulled up another chair and joined their conversation. He did not act like he was too important to sit in cheap hospital furniture or talk to ordinary people. "Sarah, I am William," he said with the same genuine warmth his wife had shown. "We have 3 children at home, and I cannot imagine how difficult this must be for your family." Sarah found herself telling them everything. She told them about Emma's love for drawing butterflies and reading stories about princesses. She explained how Emma used to dance around their living room pretending to be in a fairy tale, but now she was too weak to even sit up for long periods. She talked about selling their belongings and taking out loans, and still not having enough money for all the treatments Emma needed. Catherine asked thoughtful questions that showed she was really listening and cared about the answers. She wanted to know what Emma's favorite colors were and what books she liked to read. She asked about Emma's friends from school and whether they were able to visit. These were not the kind of questions someone asks when they are just being polite. These were the questions a friend would ask when they genuinely cared about your child. William asked about the practical things that kept Sarah awake at night. He wanted to understand how the medical system worked for families like theirs. He asked about insurance coverage and experimental treatments and waiting lists for specialists. Sarah could tell he was not just making conversation. He was gathering information like he planned to do something with it. The most amazing thing was how they made Sarah feel like the most important person in the world during those 20 minutes they spent talking. They did not check their phones or look around the room or act like they had somewhere more important to be. They gave her their complete attention in a way that made her feel heard and valued, and less alone than she had felt in months. When Catherine asked if they could meet Emma, Sarah felt her heart start racing with both excitement and worry. Emma had been so quiet and withdrawn lately that she barely spoke to Sarah or Mark, let alone strangers. Sarah was afraid that Emma might be too sick or too shy to talk to these important visitors. But Catherine seemed to understand her concerns and said they would just pop in for a quick hello, and if Emma was sleeping or did not feel like talking, they would leave right away. They walked down the hallway together toward Emma's room, which was the third door on the right past the nurse's station. Sarah felt strange walking beside people she had only seen on television during royal weddings and official ceremonies. But they chatted with her like old friends, asking about how long the family had been staying at the hospital and whether the food was decent enough to eat. When they reached Emma's room, Sarah opened the door quietly and peeked inside. Emma was awake, but staring at the ceiling with that blank expression she had been wearing for weeks. She looked so small in the big hospital bed surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed softly. Her brown hair had grown back a little bit since her last round of treatment, but it was still much shorter than it used to be. "Emma, this is Catherine and William," Sarah said gently. "They wanted to come and say hello to you." Emma slowly turned her head toward the door, but did not say anything. Sarah felt embarrassed that her usually chatty daughter was being so quiet, but Catherine just smiled and walked over to the bed like this was perfectly normal. "Hi, Emma," Catherine said as she sat down on the edge of the hospital bed. "I heard that you like to draw pictures." "That is one of my favorite things to do too." Emma's eyes got a little bit wider, but she still did not speak. Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook and some colored pencils. "Would you like to draw something together?" she asked. Emma nodded slightly, which was more response than Sarah had seen from her in days. Catherine opened the notebook to a blank page and handed Emma a purple pencil, which happened to be Emma's favorite color, even though Catherine had no way of knowing that. "What should we draw?" Catherine asked. "Butterflies," Emma whispered so quietly that Sarah almost missed it. That was the first word Emma had spoken all morning, and it made Sarah's eyes fill with tears of relief. Catherine smiled like Emma had just given her the most wonderful gift in the world. "I love butterflies," Catherine said. "Do you know they start as caterpillars, and then they transform into something beautiful?" Emma nodded and actually smiled a tiny bit. William pulled up a chair on the other side of the bed and watched as Catherine and Emma began sketching butterflies together. William started telling Emma about his own children and how his daughter Charlotte loved to draw just like Emma did. He showed Emma pictures on his phone of artwork that Charlotte had made, including a painting of a rainbow that was hanging on the refrigerator at their house. Emma giggled when she saw the picture, which was the first time Sarah had heard that sound in weeks. The conversation began flowing naturally as Emma started talking about her favorite books and movies. Catherine had read many of the same stories, and they discussed which characters they liked best. William told funny stories about his children getting into mischief at home, which made Emma laugh out loud several times. For 30 minutes, Emma was like her old self again, chatty and curious and full of life. She showed Catherine some of her own drawings that were taped to the wall beside her bed. Catherine admired each one like she was looking at masterpieces in an art museum. She asked Emma to explain the stories behind each drawing and listen to every detail with genuine interest. Sarah stood by the window watching this magical transformation take place and felt hope returning to her heart for the first time in months. After spending time with Emma, William asked Sarah if they could speak privately for a few minutes. Catherine stayed with Emma, continuing their conversation about books and butterflies, while William and Sarah stepped into the hallway. Sarah felt nervous, wondering what the future king might want to discuss with her. William asked Sarah to tell him more about Emma's specific medical situation and what treatment options were available. Sarah explained that there was an experimental therapy that might help Emma, but it was not covered by their insurance and cost more money than their family could ever afford. The treatment was only available at a special clinic in London and would require Emma to stay there for at least 3 months. Sarah told William that the doctors believed this experimental treatment gave Emma the best chance of getting completely better. Without it, Emma would continue getting sicker, and the regular treatments they had been trying were not working well enough to save her life. Sarah's voice broke as she admitted that they had already spent everything they had and even borrowed money from relatives, but it was still not nearly enough. William listened carefully to every detail, asking questions about the medical team in London and how the treatment worked. He wanted to know about timing and whether Emma was strong enough right now to travel and begin the therapy. Sarah could tell he was not just making polite conversation, but was gathering real information for a specific purpose. Then William said something that Sarah thought she must have misunderstood. He told her that he and Catherine had a private foundation that helped families in situations exactly like this one. He said they had worked with the London clinic before and knew the doctors there personally. Without hesitation or need to consult with anyone else, William told Sarah that Emma's treatment would be completely covered, including all medical expenses, travel costs, and housing for the family during their stay in London. Sarah stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. She asked him to repeat what he had just said because it seemed too good to be true. William smiled and said it again, more slowly this time. Every single expense would be taken care of through their foundation. Emma would get the treatment she needed, and the family would not have to worry about money or going into debt or losing their house. Sarah began crying so hard that she could barely breathe. These were not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming relief and gratitude. For months she had felt like she was drowning in an ocean of medical bills and impossible choices. Now suddenly someone had thrown her a life preserver that would save not just Emma but their entire family. William gently placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder and told her that no parent should ever have to choose between their child's life and financial survival. He said that he and Catherine were parents too, and they understood that there was nothing in the world more important than a child's health and happiness. Catherine appeared in the doorway, having heard some of the conversation. She came over and hugged Sarah like they were old friends. She told Sarah that they had already made some phone calls and the arrangements were being set up right now. Emma could begin the treatment as soon as she was strong enough to travel, which the doctors estimated would be within the next 2 weeks. Sarah kept saying thank you over and over again, but the words felt completely inadequate for what she was feeling. How do you thank someone for saving your child's life? How do you express gratitude for a gift so enormous that it changes everything? William told Sarah that they did not want any publicity or media attention for this. They asked her not to talk to reporters or post anything on social media about their visit or their help. This was not about getting credit or looking good in the newspapers. This was simply about helping a little girl get well and allowing a family to stay together without losing everything they had worked for. Word about the royal visit spread quietly through the children's ward, but not in the way that usually happened when famous people came to hospitals. There were no photographers taking pictures or reporters asking questions. Instead, families began whispering to each other about how different this visit was from anything they had ever seen before. Mrs. Johnson, whose son Tommy was fighting brain cancer, told Sarah that William and Catherine had spent 20 minutes sitting with her talking about Tommy's love for soccer and his dreams of becoming a teacher when he grew up. They did not just ask polite questions and move on. They wanted to know about Tommy's personality and his hopes for the future. Mrs. Johnson said she felt like they actually cared about her son as a real person, not just another sick child they were visiting. David, the young father with the baby who needed heart surgery, was amazed that Catherine had asked to hold his daughter and rock her to sleep. Most visitors were afraid to get too close to the medical equipment or worried about disturbing the babies. But Catherine sat in the rocking chair and sang soft lullabies while the baby slept peacefully in her arms. David said his daughter had not slept that well in weeks, and he believed it was because she felt safe and loved. The teenagers in the ward were usually suspicious of adult visitors, especially fancy, important ones. But 15-year-old Marcus, who had been fighting leukemia for 2 years, said William talked to him about video games and sports, like they were just two guys hanging out. William did not talk down to him or treat him like a little kid. They discussed which football teams they supported and argued good-naturedly about which players were the best. 12-year-old Sophia, who had lost her hair from chemotherapy, was embarrassed about wearing hats and scarves all the time. Catherine sat with her, and they talked about different ways to accessorize and make fashion statements. Catherine told Sophia that she looked beautiful and strong, and that her hair would grow back even more gorgeous than before. Sophia's mother said it was the first time in months that Sophia had looked in a mirror without crying. The parents began sharing their stories with each other in a way they had not done before. Usually everyone kept to themselves, dealing with their own private struggles and fears. But something about the royal visit opened up conversations between families who had been sitting in the same waiting room for weeks without really talking to each other. Mr. Garcia, whose son had been in a car accident, learned that Mrs. Chen, whose daughter had a rare genetic disorder, was from the same neighborhood where he grew up. They discovered they had many things in common and began supporting each other through the difficult days that followed. The nurses noticed the change in atmosphere immediately. Children who had been withdrawn and depressed were more talkative and engaged. Parents who had been isolated and hopeless were reaching out to help each other. The entire ward felt lighter somehow, like a heavy cloud had been lifted. Dr. Williams told the staff that he had never seen anything like it in his 30 years of working in pediatric medicine. Usually celebrity visits created excitement for a few hours, and then everything went back to normal. This time, the positive effects seemed to be lasting and growing stronger each day. Sarah found herself becoming a source of hope for other families. Parents would come to her asking about Emma's treatment and what the royal couple had been like to talk to. Sarah shared what she could without breaking her promise to keep their generosity private. She told other families that sometimes miracles really do happen, and that they should never give up hope no matter how impossible things might seem. The volunteer coordinators noticed that more people were signing up to help in the children's ward. Word had somehow gotten out in the community that something special had happened at the hospital, and people wanted to be part of bringing more hope and healing to sick children and their families. 3 weeks after the royal visit, Sarah was sitting in Emma's hospital room, reading her a story when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she did not recognize, but something told her she should answer it anyway. On the other end of the line was a woman with a kind voice who introduced herself as Dr. Rebecca Thompson from the Experimental Treatment Clinic in London. Dr. Thompson explained that all the arrangements had been made for Emma's treatment. A private medical transport would pick up Emma and the family in 2 days to fly them to London, where Emma would begin the specialized therapy immediately. Every detail had been taken care of, including a furnished apartment near the clinic where Sarah and Mark could stay during Emma's 3-month treatment period. Sarah had to ask Dr. Thompson to repeat everything because it still felt like she was living in a dream. The doctor assured her that this was completely real and that Emma's medical team in London was already familiar with her case and excited to begin helping her get better. Dr. Thompson said the success rate for this treatment with children Emma's age was very encouraging, and they had every reason to hope for a full recovery. After hanging up the phone, Sarah sat quietly for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then she grabbed Emma's hands and told her the amazing news. Emma's eyes got wide, and she asked if this meant she was really going to get better. Sarah told her that the doctors in London were going to do everything they could to make her healthy again. Emma wanted to know if she would be able to draw pictures and play with other children again. Sarah promised her that not only would she be able to do those things, but she would be stronger and healthier than she had been in a very long time. Emma smiled the biggest smile Sarah had seen from her in months, and said she wanted to draw a picture of butterflies to take with her to London. When Mark arrived at the hospital that evening after his shift at the factory, Sarah told him the incredible news. Mark sat down hard in the chair beside Emma's bed and put his head in his hands. For a few moments, Sarah was worried that he was upset about something. Then she realized that his shoulders were shaking because he was crying tears of relief and joy. Mark looked up at Sarah and Emma with tears streaming down his face and said he had been praying every single day for a miracle to save his little girl. He had started to lose hope that his prayers were being heard, but now he knew that someone had been listening all along. Mark hugged Emma so tightly that she giggled and told him he was squishing her like a sandwich. The nurses who had been taking care of Emma for months were thrilled when they heard the news. Nurse Patricia, who had become especially fond of Emma, brought her a special teddy bear to take with her to London. She told Emma that the teddy bear was magic and would help her be brave during her treatment. Emma named the bear Hope and promised to take good care of it. Dr. Williams stopped by to wish Emma good luck and told Sarah and Mark that Emma was one of the strongest little girls he had ever treated. He was confident that she would do wonderfully with the experimental therapy and that they would see her back home healthy and happy before they knew it. Sarah called her sister and her parents to share the amazing news. Everyone cried happy tears and said they had been praying for exactly this kind of miracle. Sarah's mother said she had always believed that angels sometimes come to earth, disguised as regular people, and that Sarah and Emma had been visited by two very special angels. That night, as Emma slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Sarah sat by her bed and whispered a prayer of gratitude. She thanked God for sending William and Catherine into their lives at exactly the moment when hope had seemed impossible. She promised to spend the rest of her life helping other families the way her family had been helped. 6 months later, Emma was running through the playground at her school chasing butterflies and laughing with her friends like she had never been sick at all. The experimental treatment in London had worked even better than the doctors had hoped. Emma's blood tests showed no signs of the disease that had nearly taken her life. Her hair had grown back thick and shiny, and her cheeks were rosy with health again. Sarah often watched Emma playing and remembered that terrible day in the hospital when hope had seemed as distant as the stars. Now Emma was not just surviving but thriving in ways that amazed everyone who knew her story. She had returned to school with a new appreciation for every ordinary moment, like eating lunch with friends or running in gym class or raising her hand to answer questions. The family had returned from London 3 months ago and moved back into their house, which they no longer had to worry about losing. Mark had been able to go back to working normal hours instead of double shifts because they were no longer drowning in medical debt. Sarah had started volunteering at the Children's Hospital, where their journey had begun, sharing hope with other families facing similar struggles. Emma had become something of a celebrity among the children in her class, but not because they knew about her royal encounter. Sarah and Mark had kept their promise never to speak publicly about William and Catherine's visit or their incredible generosity. Instead, Emma was famous for her kindness and her determination to help other kids who were going through difficult times. Emma had started a butterfly project at her school where children made artwork to donate to hospitals for sick kids to enjoy. She told her classmates that butterflies were special because they showed how something that seemed weak and helpless could transform into something beautiful and strong. Her teacher said Emma had inspired the whole school to think about how they could help children who were less fortunate. Sarah had received several letters from other families at the hospital telling her about unexpected help they had received for their children's medical needs. A foundation that no one had heard of before was quietly providing assistance to families who could not afford experimental treatments or specialized care. Sarah suspected she knew where this help was coming from, but she never asked questions and never broke her promise to stay silent. Mrs. Johnson's son Tommy had received funding for a special surgery that gave him a much better chance of full recovery. David's baby daughter had gotten the heart surgery she needed at a world-class children's hospital with all expenses covered. Sophia, the teenager who had been embarrassed about losing her hair, received a scholarship to attend a special summer camp for young cancer survivors, where she met other kids who understood exactly what she had been through. Dr. Williams told Sarah that the children's ward had been transformed since that special day 6 months ago. More volunteers were helping families and more resources were available for children who needed treatments their families could not afford. He said it was like someone had planted seeds of hope that kept growing and spreading to help more and more people. Emma still drew pictures of butterflies, but now she also drew pictures of princesses who helped children and kings who used their power to make sick kids better. She did not know that her drawings were remarkably accurate portraits of two real people who had changed her life forever. On quiet evenings when Emma was doing homework and Mark was reading the newspaper, Sarah would sometimes think about that moment when William and Catherine had walked into their lives. She realized that the greatest gift they had given her family was not just the money for Emma's treatment, but the reminder that there were still people in the world who cared about others and would use their privilege and power to help rather than just to benefit themselves. Sarah had learned that miracles were real and that sometimes they came disguised as ordinary people with extraordinary hearts who chose to turn silence into tears of joy and despair into hope that would last forever.